What is going on? Welcome back to Jiu-Jitsu Outlet. I'm sitting down here with the host of the A Game podcast, a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and a real estate investor, my new friend, Nick Lamagna. Welcome to the show, man. Thank you so much for
Thank you
being
for
here, man.
having me, sir. I'm happy to be on it. You've been in circles with very good company, man, and I'm happy for the invite, and I'm happy to hang out with you for the next 30 minutes.
Well, you too, man. I appreciate you. Same to you. So, Nick, I want to start off with the same question that we ask everyone, whether they're an ADCC legend like Braulio Estema, a UFC fighter like James Krause, or they're a brand new white belt who just started training. So, big question for you, man, is how has jiu-jitsu helped your mental health in all the years that you've been training?
It's interesting. One of my other fellow Jiu-Jitsu Black Belts, Ruben Rivera. He's a 10th planet Black Belt. Ran Costa Mesa, now he runs Santa Fe, but he told me one day something that I thought was really interesting about like a reset button, which I never thought of it like this, but it was so well worded. And this is what I got from it. So it's kind of going somewhere with it. I'm not going on, but he said he came down and did a private with me, and he bought his new baby, and he's like, man, she's incredible. He's like, every day it's like when your iPhone battery dies and you shut it down, and then you power it back up and it's like rebooted and now it's got new features because it updated. He's like, that's like what happens with the baby. Every night she goes to bed, she's up in the morning. Now she can say hello. Now she can grab this. Now she can crawl. And I feel like jujitsu became my reset where I'll have business problems, personal problems, whatever kind of stress or anxiety you're feeling for the day. And I feel like I can't get around it. And every fiber in me is saying, like, of all the things you should do today, it's don't go to jujitsu because you got too much other stuff going on. And when I go to jujitsu and I go there anyway, it's one of the only times throughout the day that I am forced to live in the moment and be in 10 other directions. And you just immediately forget your problems when a guy's jumping for your neck or your arm, or you're trying to get a sweep. Like you're forced to be living in every single second because it all makes a difference in there. And I feel like because me to focus on one thing and tune all that other stuff out, it allows my body and my mind to hit that reset that I wouldn't have anywhere. And then when I leave there, all of a sudden I have like a new, fresh perspective wouldn't have been able to see or hear or figure out. All of a sudden, like I'm calmer, I'm more focused, I can see things from a different angle, and it helps me handle my life and my business better and my relationships all around better. It like gives me that second wind to really see things with a fresh perspective that I don't think I've gotten anywhere else in my life.
Man, I love that. You know, when I first started training jiu-jitsu, one of my first training partners, he was a blue belt at the time, and he described jiu-jitsu as a shower for the soul. He was like, man, every time I come in here, it feels like my soul just took a shower. I was like, that
Yeah.
is that is so true. And I've just hung on to that. But like that's what you're talking about. I think that reset. It feels like something inside of you, almost from like a spiritual perspective, got reset, like you're saying. And
100%.
man, I'd like to just stick with this just for a moment longer. Could you tell us a little bit about like what were you like when you first started training jiu-jitsu, when you were like a white belt, just getting on the mat? And can you compare that with who you are today from a mental perspective?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I started as a boxer actually, and I remember I started as a weightlifter. If you really want to take back like because I remember thinking like if I can get strong, like, and I remember my buddy Isaac, shout out to him. One day he was like, we started to box together, and he was like, yeah, man, I lift a lot of weight. He's like, but what the hell makes me think that I can fight just because I can lift weights? He's like, where do I get off? And I was like, I don't really think about that. He's like, yeah, I mean, I'm strong, but like why would I've never been in a fight. What makes me think I could fight? And I was like, that's really interesting. And then my brother started boxing before me. And I remember thinking, man, I bench all this weight. I'm going to go to this boxing gym. This dude's a little bit smaller than me. And I'm not a big guy either. But I was like, I'll let him like hit me a little bit and then I'll just knock him out. And I remember like getting hit by a boxer for the first time. And dude, it was, as you probably, it was just a whole like miserable thing. So I was like, all I could think about was, I don't want to go back there ever again. But then that like drives you to like, if I let that get the better of me and I don't go there because I'm afraid to get my ass kicked again, like, what does that say about me? Boxing. And then I had an injury that kind of changed my whole life. And that made me get into kickboxing because I was like, well, now I need more weapons. I'll use my legs, my arms, my everything. And then I was like, all right, well, I don't want to get hit head every day. Let me start doing jujitsu. So when I first started getting into jujitsu, I still had a little bit of that like gritty kind of, because when you're like, I think guys that train to fight versus guys that just train for like the health of jujitsu, they have a little bit of a different speed at first, and you have that ego a little bit. But it was really interesting to me to see like the first few weeks how eye-opening it was of like, man, I really have no idea what I'm doing. Everything I think works like doesn't work. Like every time I think I'm in a like everything's just counterintuitive. Like you don't realize watch the difference. Like what really hooked me on jujitsu was after like 3 or 4 weeks, the brand new white belts that came in, I was hitting stuff on them. And I was like, well, a guillotine, I actually pulled it off. Like an omoplata, I actually pulled it off. And I was like, man, it's so crazy to see the difference between somebody that's never trained at all to even somebody that's trained like a month. And then looking at like blue belts at that time and being like, man, nobody can beat up a blue belt. Like, how can it, like, your whole mind's different. So I remember thinking like that, like a blue belt was kind of the end all be all. And then as you start to progress and you think that that's the level you want to be at, my epiphany was Matt Serra's dad. Shout out to him, Ralph Serra. I remember when I was like a purple belt and I was like, man, like I'm getting discouraged. I felt like I was getting good, but then like all these guys that always kick my ass are still kicking my ass. And he was like, yeah, that's not going to change. I was like, yeah, but I'm like a purple belt now. He goes, nothing changes, just the pecking order. He's like, all the guys that are behind you, you can most of them you can take now, but the other guys that always they're still training too. You're never going to catch them. And I was like, yeah, but I'm not. The guys that are under me are just new and they're worse. They just don't know as much. And he was like, that's all that changes. And I remember like, oh, that's just kind of like the journey. And once I understood that there was that journey and it was really, it kind of took away like, I'm not going to be better than everybody in this gym. It'll more think of it as like, okay, now I'm in this for the long haul. And that's when I started to really think about like, how do I really work on getting better? And it's not about each match and each role and each training session. It's about what do I need today? Do I just need a workout? Do I need to work on something? Do I need mental clarity? Do I just want to go be around like a bunch of positive guys? And then there's other days that you want to just really get some crazy rolls. But I think when I looked at it as more of the long ball and less of like each match I have to go in and I have to win and I have to prove myself, it allowed me to really like grow more with that art and like kind of piggyback on that. After I fought in the Golden Gloves, I promised myself that I would focus a little bit more on business, my business partners. And then after that, I kind of got away from boxing and stuff a little bit too. And I was like, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip boxing and all this other stuff. And I'm just going to focus on jiu-jitsu for the next couple of years and getting good there. And that's when I started getting better and eventually got my black belt when I stopped trying to focus on like all these different things and just focus on like showing up at jiu-jitsu every day, being consistent and getting better, which is kind of to answer your question. The difference between then and now is I used to come on the mat every day and just think about how I have to win. And now I just am happy to train, get a sweat, hang out with some good people, learn something, work on some stuff I need some help on. But I'm more in the mentality of like, I need this for my mental health and for my physical health and for the people around me. So I would rather tap out to somebody at a lower belt or like say no to a role so I can train for the next 2, 3, 4 months because I'm getting older. And if I go hard now, I can't train for the next few weeks. So I don't know if that really answered your question, but I think that's translated into life in general is I don't look at it as much as my instant gratification. I look at as my business and my personal life, my jujitsu journey now as the long ball and how do I survive and like live to fight another day and really make this like a 5, 10, 15, 20 year thing. And that really changes the perspective on how you handle things on a daily basis.
I love that, man. I think you dropped so much wisdom there. And something that you said, it reminds me of like a conversation I have with new white belts all the time, which is they always feel like they're not getting any better. And I have to kind of explain to them, like, it's not that you're not getting better. You are. It's just everyone else is also getting better. Everyone else is also still showing up. So like, I hear this a lot. Guys get frustrated and they're like, oh man, I'm still getting caught with the same submissions. It's like, well, yeah, like if you're trading with the same people, like that's their game. Of course you're going to keep getting caught with the same stuff. Like that's, like for example, if I go against James Krause, he's got one of the best guillotines ever. I'm probably going to get caught in a guillotine. Like if I get caught in his guillotine, it's not that I suck at jiu-jitsu. It's just, he's got a really great guillotine and he has not taken time off training. So his guillotine gets better. You know what I'm saying? Like it's the same with your coach. Like the only way you're going to beat your coach ever is if he like gets injured for years and you keep going in that time, but how often does that happen? Like super rare. It's super rare that someone like gets injured and takes like a year off and you have that time to catch up and then they come back. Usually it's either they come back like 3 weeks later or they just never come back. They just get injured and don't return, which is unfortunate. But like, what I'm saying, like most of the time, the only way that you're going to like catch up with people is if they get injured and you like triple down on your training in that time. Otherwise, you're not going to notice that you're getting better at something until you go and you fight, like you said, like the new guy who just came in, or maybe you go to a different gym and you compete against, you have a match against someone there, or maybe you go to a tournament. Like that's obviously why tournaments are so beneficial, because that's the real testing ground where you can actually see like where do you stand up in the world. But man, I want to transition this a little bit and just tie this over into entrepreneurship, because I know that you do a lot in real estate. And there's so much that you said, man, that ties over to real estate. So I wanted to just kind of talk about that. Like, how has martial arts helped you in your career, especially if we're talking about real estate?
This is one of the biggest benefits I've seen. I tell people all the time, just as business and entrepreneurs. Shout out to my buddy Raging Al Iaquinta, UFC legend, got his brown belt today from Matt Serra. But I remember he talked about like he'd sign a fight or something. I was like, dude, you just signed a fight Dan Hooker in Australia. He said, yeah, man, I like to dig myself a hole and try and see if I can find my way out. And like I love that and respect him. Obviously, everybody who knows him knows he does that kind of stuff. That a lot of like the fact that you're like deep in this hole. I feel like what martial arts has done is taught you to like really get yourself in a bad spot. And instead of freaking and panicking, you try and find a way to dig yourself out. And that has been by far the biggest thing that's translated into from boxing into jujitsu into personal and professional stuff, but especially on the business side, falls apart, deal falls apart, somebody gets greedy, somebody does this, partner that. Like there's always something happening that you have to put back together. And it becomes a very like high low, like you're kind of in that fight or flight all the time. And I think learning from like a white belt when you're panicking everywhere, that's why like for the new guys, like you lose all this weight when you first start because you don't really know where to relax. You're just kind of muscling through everything, and it's all these new energies and new muscles and new moves and new stuff. So like it's like a shock to your system, so you get really good results. But then you see like the higher belts, and they're like kind of we're getting back to like our little pear shapes over here, but it's because you know how to just stay relaxed. And like even like I'll go to new gyms all the time, and there'll be a guy that'll grab me, and they're big and they're strong, and I'll kind of let them get on top, and they'll kind of, do a little face pressure and stuff. And I just am able to sit there and go, all right, we got like 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes, depending on the gym. I just have to kind of relax and stay calm and just wait for my opening. And once he gives it to me, now I know I have to jump on it because I might only get one shot, but I'm going to find that shot and I'm going to go for it. And I feel like that's what happens in business. It's like when the sky is falling and everything's falling apart around you and everybody's telling you the real estate market's crazy and you can't do deals with interest rates and inflation and this and that and all these different things, you're able to go, stay calm, always a way to make money. There's always a way to make a deal to come together. How do I just stay level headed and really think with a clear head and how to find my way out of this and get back on top? And that has been like a game changer for me in business.
Man, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, you think about like just an allegory from this last weekend. We had Izzy versus Perea, right? We had that big rematch between Izzy and Alex, and saw that same thing where Alex went in for the kill. And to the average Joe, it would look like Israel was finished, but he covered up and he landed his shot. And, he was able to see through the chaos, if that makes sense. He was able to see through all of the fury that was coming at him, and he landed his shot and he got the win. And it's that same sort of thing that you're talking about. It's like, even though you see the whole world collapsing, even though the whole market is caving in around you, you're still able to take that shot. You're still able to see through the chaos and maintain that composure. So, man, I'd love to like talk a little bit more about this because I'm sure there's someone listening who wants to get involved and start to maybe use real estate to enhance their life. Could you share with us just a little bit about that? Like, how did you get started in real estate? And just if there's someone listening, maybe give just any tips you might have for how they might also be able to get started.
So it's very interesting the timeline of like where you're asking this today, because when I started, it was like 2005, 2006. And, I had this hand injury and then I couldn't, I was supposed to be in law enforcement. I wanted to be like a federal agent and all these things. And then I had this hand injury and then I couldn't do law enforcement anymore. And then from there, it was like right around the same time I got into real estate was the same time I got into like jiu-jitsu and MMA and all that stuff. So it was really trying to find like, what am I going to do with my time now? Because I couldn't work because of my injury. So I started going to jiu-jitsu. And when I wasn't at jiu-jitsu, I started going and looking at real estate. But I remember like what got me in is everybody was like, man, like we're killing it. 6 months later, it's worth all the liar's loans. Like it was like anybody can get a loan, anybody can buy a house, and then anybody can just sell the house and make money. And from the time that like I started really digging into my first property, the time I bought my first property, the market totally shifted in like that 6-month period. And then all of a sudden it was like everybody was like, man, you're getting it now. Like what kind of idiot told you to get into real estate now? Like, don't you know the market's bad? Get away from this market, get away from that market. You shouldn't have signed up for this shit. So everybody was telling me run, 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 run. But I didn't have the option to. I literally had nothing else I can do. So I was forced to still make it work and still find deals and still try to make things work in a creative market. But having said that, when you look back to when that market rebounded, all of the people that really created long-term wealth and picked up some of the best deals, they bought them in that downturn. So listening to people who really took that fear and they let that fear control them and they listen to the media knowing it's a bad time. I look at it now as when the market changes like that and you hear like all this stress and bad crap in the news about how the market's going to tank, that means that there's about to be a sale on real estate and real estate's always going to go back up. So over time, the market rebounded and I have all these strategies that I know how to do now in a down market, almost like jujitsu. You know, you kind of have your hit moves that you could always go to when you're in trouble. I have that arsenal that I can go into. So I started going into different deals and I was trying to make it work in New York City with like no money, no credit, no accessibility. And it was really competitive. And as much as I really wanted to do deals in my own market, I just couldn't get any deals. So I was forced to start to look out of markets at like Vegas, Michigan, Georgia, Delaware, all these places where you could literally go and buy houses for like 50, 60, $75,000, put 20, 30 in and sell them for like 150, 175, 200. So I started doing a lot of that because it felt more comfortable to me at the price point. That before there was all this technology to like Zoom and FaceTime and all that stuff. So I had to get good at flipping remotely before it was like the cool thing to do because of the pandemic. So I got to be good at that. And I've always done that. I've done deals all over the country for a very long time. And most of the properties I never see, I don't use any of my own money. And it's only gotten easier over the years. But having said that, you know, I transitioned from single family into commercial, into developments. I've done a bunch of wholesale, done kind of everything with single family and for all kinds of different stuff from lease options to all kinds of creative strategies, subject tos. But you're coming against a time now where you saw that happen at the beginning of the pandemic, where people had grand slams that looked like base hits before it happened. And then a lot of people missed that boat because everybody was going, and this is parlay like your question of anybody listening now that's going, should I get in? There's a lot of fear. And a lot of people would be in the same market where I am, where they'll go to somebody and say, should I get into real estate now? And somebody might say, don't get into real estate now. It's a bad time. Things are about to get crazy. Whereas like the OG investors that have been through the market cycles know you're about to hit one of the best times to actually get in because real wealth is created in a down market when deals are on sale. And we're about to hit that. So if you missed the 2006 crash and then you missed the pandemic, we're about to hit the third time in probably like a 15 or 20-year period that we're due for a market cycle where you can come in and really, really get some great deals. So I would say don't let the fear get to you. Don't let the naysayers get to you. Stick with it and just start to acquire some wealth. Get some good deals now. Be picky because you can afford to be picky and do one at a time the safe way. And those deals that look like just base hits now over 2, 3, 4, 5 years, those are the kind of things that'll make you a millionaire.
I love it, man. And going back to jujitsu, it's kind of like that whole concept of, you know, you've got to just get in there and work. You've got to just get in there and practice and just train and just do it. Like you can sit around and watch jujitsu or wrestling or UFC on YouTube all day. But if you don't get in there and take your first class and actually sign up and pull the trigger, you're not going to get better at martial arts. It's the same thing with real estate. It's like, if you want to get better at real estate, you've got to just get in and do your first deal, you know? And if it doesn't go great, you know, it's okay. Like my first deal didn't go great and I learned a lot, you know, now I'm on to my next one. So it's like, you know, like look at Grant Cardone, for example. He's one of the most well-known real estate investors on the internet right now. And his first deal like completely tanked. He talks about it in one of his books. You know, his first deal completely crashed. Like he lost a ton of money. You know what I mean? So like there's all these stories of people who made a ton of money in real estate who their first deal fell through. Their first deal completely tanked and they lost money and they bounced back. It's the same thing with jiu-jitsu. Look at how many people lost the belt in the UFC and then they went on to win again. Like going back to Israel Adesanya again. He just lost, but he came back. You know what I'm saying? So it's that same thing. You just got to get in there. And it's like that old phrase of, you know, nothing ventured, nothing gained. If you don't take advantage and just try to take a risk, like you're never going to achieve anything, man. So true. So just to kind of bring this home, man, like let's say again, there's someone listening to this and they're wanting to get started. Maybe they're a white belt in jiu-jitsu or they're new in their jiu-jitsu journey and they're not quite certain about like pulling the trigger. Like, is there anything that you can tell them about like, hey, here's what you should be looking for your first deal? Like, I guess to go more broadly, I mean, sorry if this is like super broad, but like, what do you recommend as a first thing for people to get into? Because obviously like Airbnb is super hot right now. But like, is that a great move, or do you think people should be looking more traditional, like just go and get you know, a duplex or something that you can rent out or house hack or something like that? Like, how do you usually recommend people kind of get in, if that makes sense?
Statement because you have to look at it as like what do they need right now? Like some people have money, some people have time, some people have neither, some people have experience, some people are in good markets, bad markets, some people want cash, some people want cash flow. some people have challenge credit, some people are in a great position. Like, so it really depends. Like, do you want to be active? Do you want to be passive? Like, what are you looking for? But I would say really have a first off a conversation with somebody who's been doing it. We'll find a real estate black belt and have a conversation with them about like really what you're looking to get after, because I have conversations with people all the time, and what they tell me they want is completely unobtainable. Like it's like walking into the gym the first day and go, hey man, I want to sign up for your monthly program. I'd like to have a black belt in 2 months and maybe my first UFC fight in like 3 months. And it's like, dude, that doesn't happen. But so first off, I would say have a realistic expectation of what you can achieve based on your time frames, your timelines, and stick with it for 6 months and make sure you do the first one right, then do the second one right, then do the third one right. And if 6 months later you decide you don't like flipping, you want to buy and hold, awesome, switch. If you decide you don't like cash flow, you want to flip, awesome, switch. But pick something, stick with something, and commit to it for 6 months for what you want to do, but also be realistic, because a lot of the things we do is we lie to ourselves. So don't lie to yourself about what you have to offer. If you don't have time, don't think you're going to go flip a multi-family property over the next 6, 9, 12 months because you're going to lose your ass on it because you don't have the time to commit to it. So that's the biggest thing I could say is if you do have time to put in, that's a really, really great thing because that's going to help you. But if you don't, you might want to look for more of a passive way, because that's where people drop the ball and lose money, is they over leverage themselves for things that they shouldn't have gotten into because they really can't focus on it. And just like we're talking about with jiu-jitsu, if you're not on the mat focusing, if you're not in your deal, focused on your deal, you can get really hurt physically or financially. So pick something that works for you, focus with it for the next 6 months. Just make sure you do one at a time, because you do not have to be rich tomorrow. It's the long ball. Treat it like that.
That's fantastic advice, man. Like everything, it just builds, man. Nick, this has been a fantastic conversation, man. But before we wrap this up, can you tell us a little bit about your podcast? Tell us about the A Game and just like where can we go to learn more about you? And if you could, like, what are some of the big things that you've been exploring on the show lately? If you could just maybe share that with us.
Appreciate that, man. Yeah. So my podcast is the A Game Podcast. It's also the A Game Podcast, Real Estate Investing for Entrepreneurs. If you guys wanted to find it anywhere, if you went to nicknick.com/links, LINKS, it will link you to everywhere you can listen and watch that podcast, which is pretty much on all platforms. But it's been cool. It's basically, I was looking to start a podcast and it was going to be real estate centered, but then I was like, man, everybody, like the guys kind of do the rounds. And I'm like, well, why would somebody want to invest with me if they can just go on this person's podcast, call this guy, call that guy? So I was like, well, what's something that's like interesting and niche to me? And that's when I started going and interviewing guys like, James Krause, Ally Quinta, and getting a lot of these jiu-jitsu and MMA guys that are entrepreneurship and or real estate investors, and getting them on to talk about their journey. Because one of my favorite quotes is, how you do anything is how you do everything. And I don't care what it is, from athletes I've had on to businessmen I've had on to real estate investors to actors, musicians, comedians, astronauts. It's basically the same story every week of them having to overcome obstacles, mental, physical, all kinds of hurdles, and just push through and be tenacious with their goals and their focus to get where they want. And I don't care what it is, that same story is the same from start to finish. So that's really what's happened, is it's evolved over time. But it's basically people who bring their A game and they commit to things and they find success, and no matter what it is. And it's a little bit of a combination of a lot of MMA and jiu-jitsu guys. Like I've had Gary Tonin, Alger Sterling, Matt Serra, Ray Longo, Ally Quinn, like a lot of really, really good JT Torres, some really big names on there that have come on and talked about like the business side and how jiu-jitsu's helped them in business. And then I have the other side, like the David Greens and the Brandon Turners, and a lot of these really, really big entrepreneurs and investors that are now on the other side of falling in love with jiu-jitsu. So it's jiu-jitsu black belts coming on and talking about their white belt experience in business, and then it's black belts in business coming out talking about their white belt jiu-jitsu experience, and really kind of mixing and matching both, which has been really cool to put those worlds together. And last but not least, I tell everybody, jiu-jitsu is the new golf, man. Like the amount of doors it's opened for me in business is insane. Like the way you used to go on the golf course and network with people, like it brings relationships all over the country for multiple different things. And that community, man, it just says a lot when you tell somebody, hey, I trained under Matt Serra, gave me his black belt. People go, cool, let's get on a call. Like it's different. It's really cool. So I've been very lucky for the people that have come on, and it's opened a ton of doors. And lately we've just been kind of exploring a lot of what are people doing in this market? Like, how is it changing? Because people are scared right now. It's a transitioning market. You have to be careful. So it's been a lot of recently coming on and just seeing how people are adjusting in a changing market and what's really working. And that's really, I think, very timely and important for everybody in all aspects of business and finance.
Nick, this has been an amazing conversation, man. I've got time for one more question if you do, but
Anything you want, man, hit me.
I've got so just to touch on something that you just kind of brushed on there is, man, you're so right. Like jujitsu is like an international fraternity, especially at this point. Like you can literally, like when I was in the army I was stationed in Germany, and I got to go all over. Like you can go to freaking Norway, Poland, like Germany, France, any of these countries, and just drop in at a school and you're going to have friends. Like by the end of that day, anywhere in the world, you can go in. Like I remember going to Norway, hanging out at Bergen Grappling, shout out Bergen Grappling. And the coach Ivan got me in a Kimura within like 30 seconds, taught me some Kimura details. And then we went out to eat afterwards, made a new friend. And then he offered to take us on a hike of the mountain. He was like, hey, you guys want to go like hike the mountain tomorrow? It's like, fuck yeah. And it was like one of the most amazing times of my life, going to hike this mountain in Norway, all because of I went and trained jujitsu with these guys. Like that's just one of many stories. But just to tie this into a question, like, where do you see jujitsu going? Like in the grand scheme of things, like, where do you feel like this community can go in the next, let's say 5 to 10 years? What do you think is the potential here?
I think you're going to see a lot of like just freak athletes and stuff that are coming on. They're doing amazing things at a very early level, like the Rutola brothers, like guys that because it's just different now. Like people can literally grow up and just say, I want to be a jiu-jitsu fighter and make a living just doing jiu-jitsu. They never have to get punched in the face. They never have. So I think it's going to be interesting to watch kind of the new generation who comes up with like their dads that were black belts or their granddads that were black belts now, and they just are literally born on the mat. So I think it's going to become crazy watching like the younger generation just tighten up and evolve stuff. But I just had a conversation with the guy at Gracie Tampa South, and he was talking about how like over the years he's watched the evolution where like, okay, it's half guard, and then people got away from half guard and they went to leg locks, and then they get away from leg locks and they go back to like the other. So there's always the new hot thing, whether it's body locks or whatever. And I think it's probably going to be like real estate, that it just cycles. You know what I mean? Like there'll be variations on stuff. Like, well, there's rentals, but then there's Airbnbs. It's like, well, there's half guard, but then there's coyote guard. Like, so I think you'll see some of those variations, but I think it's almost too much. There's like too much stuff out there, and I think it's always going to come back to the fundamentals. So I think when you can get good at something, you're going to see guys that become experts at those one or two or three things, and you're just going to see some really cool variations and stuff from those positions. But I think overall, it's going to become cyclical. You're going to see the leg locks are big, then the leg wings are not big, then and then it all kind of turn back. But I just think the level of athlete is going to be incredible.
Totally agree, man. I'm really excited too to see like what techniques come back, because something I'm nerd out about is, this is a whole nother podcast, but I like is the martial arts history of the moves itself. There's a great YouTube channel called hosted by a guy named Chatty. He's been on this podcast before, but he goes deep on like the history of the moves. And he talks so much about like how none of these moves are new. Like there's footage of guys doing the Mikey lock, like the Mikey foot lock that has been making waves. There's footage of people doing that in like the early 1900s in like judo schools in Japan. I remember I went to a seminar. Sorry, it froze there for a second.
Yeah, you froze up me a minute. You're saying
Anyway,
1900s lock in
yeah,
Japan?
it was yeah, they have footage of the Mikey lock in 1900s in Japan. And I went to a seminar with Dean Lister once, and he told us that he was visiting in like some Middle Eastern country when he was traveling. And he said that he saw an ancient statue from Mesopotamia that is thousands of years old of someone doing an omoplata. So he was like, Dean Lister was like, I swear to God, guys, I saw someone doing a statue of an omoplata. But man, this has been an amazing podcast, Nick. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Yeah, just any parting words, man, that you want to leave us with.
Well, thanks for having me on, man. I always love talking to anybody, especially real estate, but definitely real estate and jiu-jitsu. Like, this is my wheelhouse, man. So made me feel good coming on, talking to it. Final words and thoughts, I would just say, I want to give one of our black belts at Sarah BJJ, Paul Hulk Smash Harrison, one of the nicest, friendliest guys you will ever meet in your life. Gentle giant, been around a long time, and he passed away unexpectedly. And his wake and services and stuff for this weekend, and he left behind kids and a family and a lot of friends and people that love him. So I just want to give a shout out to him, because I feel like he's always he'll always text me when I pop up on a podcast. He'll be like, this person gave a shout out. So I could picture him almost being like, dude, you went on a BJJ podcast and I didn't even get a shout out. What do I got to do? So shout out to my buddy Paul Hulk Smash. We miss him, we love him. And anybody, if you follow my Instagram, I assume there's going to be like a GoFundMe or something for his family. So if you follow along with that, just look out for that, because he was one of the good ones. We lost a good one in our Sarah family, but the BJJ community in general just lost a good person.
I'm really sorry to hear that, man. That sucks.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that.
It sucks. Well, yeah, throw me the links. I'll put all the links down below. So if you are listening, go check out the links that are below and click those links and
Yeah,
do the
but other than
things
that,
that
I would
those
say
links tell you to do.
go do jujitsu. Go like that. That would be my final parting words. Is just start today because everybody only wishes they started real estate or started jujitsu 5, 10, 15 years ago. It's never going to feel like the perfect time. Get your butt to a gym, call a real estate agent, and just start going today.
It's amazing, again, like just how many similarities there are between these things. Like you can't wait for the right time, man. You just got to get started.
Yeah.
Nick Lamagna, thank you so much, brother. This has been badass. Appreciate you. A Game Podcast. Check it out.
Thank you, sir. I look forward to rolling with you in the near future.
Hell yeah.